All I heard was the word squirrel. Squirrel?
No, it's a bandersnatch. That's a different beast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are here on YouTube, you can look down and you'll see a link to Zoom, and you can actually join us there. If you are here and you're a participant and you're looking at all these fine people here in the panel, and you're wondering, how can I become part of this? How can I be a panelist? I have things to say. I have things to share. You can do that. You just need to be here before 6:40 and have good internet, good audio, good video, and we'd love to have you. We open the doors a little before 6 o'clock. In the morning, Pacific Standard Time, and in the morning we can't promise anything. Today we had a spirited discussion about NLEs and lots of other things, and we looked at some city councils and looked at their Zooms, and it was a wide ranging morning, but it's usually fun, but there's no guarantee. At 6:43, we do the mic checks, or roughly 6:43, we do mic checks. Once we do those mic checks, there's not going to be any more people added to the panel. So definitely get here early and be ready. If you are, the one thing to know is that this is really dependent on you. This entire show is dependent on your input. And so it's important for you to ask questions and to vote those questions up. If you're new here, in the chat, you'll see a link to Makana. If you're in Makana, start asking questions and voting. And so that's the important piece here. The first hour is general discussion. Second hour is something usually somewhat vertical. So video is our today, and we're going to talk about lenses. So if you have a question about lenses, put lenses : and then put your question in. That way we know to save it for the second hour. Second hour tomorrow is going to be talking about museums and cultural centers and how can they use virtual media and virtual meetings and media and those types of things in their offerings in the current situation. And then Friday we'll be talking about comms. We're going to talk about like what are comms and how do we build back channels. Saturday we talk about education every second hour. So that's what we have coming up. And Bill, I'm going to let you ask questions. I realized I didn't plug my little laptop in, and so it's going to die here soon. So just give me 1 second here, and we'll. I got it all set up. I was all ready to go, and then I looked up, and my little battery thing is going off. So just stand by.
And I changed microphone or earphone cables, and so I have to pin it to myself, and I'm sorry about that. Okay. Well, we're going to have a fun day today. We have some interesting questions. We have one really complicated, long one that I'm trying to parse through and figure out whether or not we're going to attack that. And Alex will know. There he goes. Another connection. My wife, when we were dating eons ago, I said, yes, I will marry you. I was only really concerned about one thing, and that's the number of wires you own.
All right, what questions do we have here now?
Okay, we're starting with Stuart Fairweather in Melbourne, Australia. And Stuart asks, I've always relied on scopes for exposure, but with HDR being in nits on displays and nits being candela per meter squared, is it time to get a light meter? What's everyone's favorite? I had somebody once say to me that good scopes are a light meter.
Yeah, that's I don't. We usually I usually when someone says when I see a light meter, I always try to train people that you grab onto the wrist and you put your arm over top of the arm and then push away. They'll just drop it and they'll move on. So I'm a big scopes person. I still think you can get scopes that are rated for for HDR, and I would highly recommend using those scopes as opposed to moving to a. I don't think that my opinion is light meters aren't accurate or aren't precise enough. They're very accurate, but not precise. You're measuring one small area of a location rather than what the camera's actually seeing. And so I'm not a big fan of wandering around with a little box trying to figure stuff out. I do it when I'm trying to figure out what lights I have a light meter. And if I'm trying to figure out what lighting is coming into my scene because I'm not controlling it, I pay more attention to it. But in general, I'm a pretty heavy duty scope person. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Courtney, and then Mickey.
I'm just going to double check we are on YouTube because I want to show that answer to some cinematographers that I work with who absolutely refuse to use scopes, and it drives me nuts. Like, my background is broadcast and the tech stuff and whatever, and I've always used scopes, and I always know what I'm getting, even if it's
So there's
not
again
displayed properly on their LUTs. But
the issue is that the light meter will tell me what light is coming in. So if I need something, if I need to know what lights are in front of me, if I need to know what it is outside, I mean, that is useful to me because it affects what my scopes are doing. But what I really rely on once I've established that, and if I control it, if I know what kind of lights, if I'm in a controlled environment, then I only care about my scopes. And so because I don't, I know what color I'm posting there. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Mickey.
I haven't seen too many light meters on sets in Hollywood lately. I think what a light meter is good for, if you're going to use it in the set, is to give you a relative balance of your key to fill. And then if you're lighting a new, if you can't be in front of a monitor, if you're lighting a new set, you can set your base ratio for the key and fill ratio to the right f-stop, the f-stop you want to work at, without having to go back to the scope. And once you get them in the range, then you can fine tune everything at the camera level. But it standardizes your lighting, and so it gives you an easy working bed. And I see a few gaffers use old school light meters just for setting the ratios and making sure they're in the ballpark, before they hand it over to the DIT for the fine tuning.
And I think that for the most part, though, we can see a lot of that. I mean, if you know what you're looking at in scopes, you can see a lot of that as well. Foreground and background. If you're looking if you understand it, we always joke that when you're looking at scopes, after a while, you see blonde, brunette. Like you can, like from the Matrix, it may look like something that's great, but we can see what those are.
You can see it, but usually when the gaffer's in the set telling the guy throw a single in that light and put a double in that light, they're not looking at a scope. They're in front of where the talent's going to stand. So.
Yeah, and again, what we do is we're looking through the camera all the time. Like when we're lighting, we're looking through cameras and scopes all the time. Like it's not, we're not. So I think that's the distinction. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Bill.
Yeah, Courtney pretty much covered what I was gonna say. Like a light meter is definitely a very useful, and actually like looking at your ratios. Like most of the time in narrative situations, you set the camera to the shutter angle, the opening, and the ASA, the ISO that you want to use, and then you adjust the lights for the image to look good in with those settings on the camera. So you don't touch the camera settings at all. You adjust the lights to it. In terms of what brands, the most prominent brand I see is Sekonic, and I've been seeing Sekonic on set since I was like 5 years old. So then they're still pretty good there.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
What changed my approach to everything was the dawn of the false color era. Somebody figured out that you could map luminance values and in not only full stops, but half stops and things like that into different colors. And if you're using false color enabled, and you can take a portable monitor out on the set with you, you can see what the camera sees, know exactly what the colors mean in terms of a split between a stop down or a half stop down or 2 stops down or up, and tweak to that. And that's easier for me, particularly if you have something that you need to do a field for, like a green screen, because if it isn't all exactly the same color, you're not entirely even on your lighting on that.
Well,
so good multi-tool.
I'm not capable of doing a green. I'm capable of doing a green screen without scopes, but man, I almost never do it. Scope for me, the big thing with scopes, I mean, specifically, is green screen. Without an RGB parade, I feel like you're crippled.
I agree with you, but I'm just saying if you're up aiming lights to achieve that, that's when this area is not there. But
that's exactly what we use scopes for. Like is when we're aiming the lights. So I look through scopes and I sit there and literally turn the light like this. I have a scope in front of me and I'm moving the light looking at the scopes, because it's not just where that is, but it's really making sure that I'm getting a perfectly clean line going across it. And I think it would be very hard to do that without scope. I mean, I wouldn't do anything that I wouldn't do any green screen that someone's paying me for without scopes. Go ahead, Eric, and Sky.
I sold my Sekonic a year and a half ago, because ever since mirrorless cameras, I see the exposure instantly, and I can adjust it instantly.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Well, and Eric, to your point of always wanting a histogram, that's the tool of measurement that you are most familiar with. And again, chefs often don't have recipes. It's all to taste. And so that's why I really appreciate Mickey's point about the audio at 24. There's no magic number at the number 24. It's just what feels right for this circumstance. So it is a measurement tool. And I love, by the way, Bill, I love having learned this new tool of the, what did you say? When everything's pink and blue, what's that?
Yeah, a false color monitor.
False color is a brilliant
And it's
tool.
usually just a mode. It's a standard monitor. You can put it into false color mode.
And I think the vast majority of folks that use, for instance, light meters all started when there was film. When you didn't have a live feed of what out of your camera. To get to Eric's point, is that you didn't have a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get coming out of the camera. You didn't have a color accurate monitor that was showing exactly what was coming out of the camera, and you couldn't. So you had to make all these. You had to kind of sample things to figure out whether when it goes through processing it's going to come out the other end. I don't see anybody that has started in the last decade using them. It's kind of an older tool. But I do think that when we talk about cooking, chefs cook to taste, and they can get away with that. But to make it repeatable, to make it something that you start to measure it, when I make coffee at home, my temperature is within a couple degrees. My weight is within a gram. The amount of water that I use is, within milliliters of the same, and the filter is, and the way it's filtered is exactly the same amount of time.
And you go to a McDonald's because you're always going to get the exact same thing in Paris. So
you can experiment with those, but the point is that, and I find that to be interesting. Like baking is something that is highly precise, because and the reason it's highly precise is because so much is happening in so little time and not stuff that you can just kind of sample. You just have to wait for 45 minutes to see if it pops out. And so in the same sense that, we want to learn as a group how to be more precise, and because that becomes repeatable and that becomes a business. Repeatable is a business, what makes a good golfer is not that you got one hole right. It's that you get them all right. Or almost always right, and so you have to find a pattern in which you can repeatably, and reliably produce a result. That's how you turn it into a business. And before you do that, you're just, messing around. Go ahead, Mike, and then Bill.
Yeah. So as I'm monkeying around with like a dozen different settings in camo, I'm going to say shading, right? Alex, there's got to be a fine line between how do you fix it with lights, and then there's this temptation where I can fix it with software. And I know lights, you're going to say lights are always going to be king, right? Light to set the best you can. But then with shading and stuff like that, like how tempting is it to go that route?
It's a mixture of all of those. When you do it well, you're using all the tools exactly the way that, to what they're built for. So it's a mixture of big soft, you're not gonna be able to replace big soft lights or well lit, environments. But you can, when you use all those tools in conjunction with each other, you end up with a better end result. Let's move on. I think the problem is when I'm on my laptop, I realized on my desktop, I have a very clear idea of how many questions we have left, and on my laptop, and I'm in the wrong one, so I'm not visible to this. So.
Yeah, we have 11 in these two big ones that are.
So I just don't see them, and somehow we got a new login, and I'm disconnected from my. I don't see the questions in the back.
Things are improving, but they're also changing.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
Okay, we're going to move on to now. This is a little complicated. This is the A. Mitchell's question, and he's got really two, and they're pretty big, and they're borderline political, but not really political. There is a technical side of this, so I'm going to dive through them. And Alex, you can decide whether we want to stay here or move on. He says, in honor of the recent removal of head of cybersecurity Chris Krebs, let's finally answer the question: does pineapple belong on pizza? How do campaigns like this combat disinformation affect us as media professionals and responsible storytellers? And then he has a couple of links down here to a story that says the war on pineapple, understanding foreign interference. So do you want to?
I don't quite understand that question.
He's really asking about political campaigns and disinformation and our role as media professionals and responsible storytellers in addressing that topic.
It's not our role. I'm just gonna I want to kind of have a dose of reality for everybody real quick here. We can kick it around a little bit, but the news has never been truthful. Like it's never been accurate, ever. I have been working behind the scenes on this for the last 30 years. You were never getting the whole story. We were all getting the same story. So we all decided that that same story was all the truth. And so we had a shared version of the truth, but that truth wasn't near what was actually happening, and it's a mixture of manipulation. It's a mixture of making sure that deciding that people can't handle what is actually happening. What we're actually doing, overseas, what is, and then, but it's also the press that they're out to tell a story. When I was in Zimbabwe, I told the story before, but when I was in Zimbabwe during the elections in 2000, I'm watching CNN report on something that I'm standing in the middle of. And the difference between what I was standing in and what CNN was reporting was night and day. Like I didn't even know where their crew was to get what they were getting. They were showing all these big crowds, and I was in an empty street, and that snapped it for me. Like it just snapped the thought that what I was seeing was true, ever. And it's not that they're lying. It's just not the truth, and so it's not like there's no big campaign. There's no there's some disinformation. People are trying to put this stuff out. But the point is that what's more important than media professionals trying to figure out how to tell the truth, which is important. We should think about those things. But what's really important is to educate the people watching media to not take one sample. Their MSNBC is not truthful. Neither is Fox. Neither is CNN. Neither is NPR. None of them are the truth. What you need to do is watch all of them. You get samples from all of those things, and whatever they agree on is probably pretty close to the truth. And what they don't agree on is their own opinion. And so the thing is that, but if they, the thing is that you have to kind of, as a consumer, I tell my kids ask me questions and I give them relatively absurd answers often. I do that on purpose, specifically so that they don't take a single point of even me as the single point of the truth that they follow. That they should, I have a mantra that they should be constantly, taking multiple samples from multiple locations and triangulating the position of truth from those samples, all of which by themselves are inaccurate. And so the thing is that, we just have to get into this thing. I think it's very healthy for people to get to a point where they don't believe anything that they see out of hand. That video of that, whatever it is not the truth. It's not the whole story. It's not anything that, you should look at it and go, well, we'll see how that turns out. We'll see. I need more data. What you should be looking at anytime you see anything that makes you go, oh my goodness, I need more data. Like I need other data from other locations before I make a decision about what just happened there, because rarely is it a accurate view of that. And as video manipulation and image manipulation, I think that's a wonderful thing. And the reason I think it's a wonderful thing is because I don't think anyone should believe anything that they see, out of hand. Like you should not see a single point of video from someone's phone and decide that is what happened, and make a trajectory of where our country's going from one camera angle, And so anyway, I just, so I don't think it's, I don't get a bunch of videos that are bold-faced lies are necessarily something we should do. But anybody who's worked in PR knows that you're shaving the truth. Every time you work, you're putting your best foot forward. You're not necessarily telling a lie, but you're not generally not telling the whole story, because you couldn't. You'd make a 1-hour video 2 days long if you tried to tell the whole story, and then people get out the other end and wouldn't know what you were talking about anyway. Eric, and then Courtney, and then Stuart, and then Sky, real quick.
I agree wholeheartedly on your suggestion to sample. I think that's a great suggestion, but I would wonder what people think about mutually accepted scientific measure of bias and truth.
There is no mutually accepted scientific measure.
I didn't say there was.
Okay.
I said, what about striving for a mutually accepted scientific measure of bias and truth?
It just won't happen. It's not, go ahead, Courtney, and then Stuart, and then Sky.
The problem is, what is truth? And determining truth is very difficult, even in a court of law, where everybody gets up and raises their right hand and says that'd be this hand, says they swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, then they lie. And that happens all the time, because every time you have a court case, there's two sides, and each takes opposing point of view, and somebody's lying. But the problem is in our capitalistic world, news coverage and social media is built on advertising and clicks. The more sensational it is, the more clicks it
But
gets.
it's
So
but
that's
even
going to
before we even get into the new stuff, though, I mean, let's just look at how many times in the past science has been so sure of the way, and there's been a general consensus that they've been so sure of the way things are, they took away Pluto. I mean, they took away Pluto. You know, so
well,
the thing
that's
is
kind of
that
an
that was
opinion.
that. But the point is that there are so many things that they go, we're absolutely sure. You know what we said? We're absolutely not sure. You know, and this just kind of. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay attention to science. I love science, and I love exploring that. But I love exploring it as our current understanding of the way things are, not the way things are. You know, and I think that is what scientists should constantly be saying: is our current understanding of the way
Right.
things work is this, but they say it like it is. Scientists have it's their own religion that they say things as if it was handed to them, in that process, and that's religion, is to absolutely believe that. And
Religion
so,
is faith, but
well, there's a lot of faith in
well,
science.
there's
Right.
knowledge available at that point in time,
Right.
and it evolves. More knowledge is gained as we gain more tools and more
It is.
insight.
It is, but and
and
a
it
lot of
evolves.
it's, but we just have to know that everything that we're being told right now might be completely reversed within the next couple decades, because we've now learned some new truth, and that's fine. And again, I love that exploration. I love science. I love exploring. I love learning those things, but I also view it through a filter of, this is our current knowledge of the way things work, not the truth of the way things work. And it's very important to continually separate that as media professionals, is to not have it be like what we say is the truth, because it's not. It's our view at that moment. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Bill, and then Sky, and then Mike.
Before I get to my actual point, I'd like to point out that Pluto was never a planet, and it is now the lead of the dwarf planets, even though Eris is bigger. Okay, now back to Mr. Mitchell's question. As a foreigner to this panel, and somebody who comes from the place where most of your media interference is born from through one particular person who owns too much media, I'm going to answer the salient point of the question. No, there is no place on pineapple ever on pizza for pineapple. I got it wrong.
I don't know.
You know
I
my
think
point.
pineapple on pizza is a wonderful thing. Anyway, Bill, and then Sky.
Nope. My vote on pineapple is there the presence of Canadian bacon or ham? Without that, there is no place. Anyway, my point was going to be from back to Orson Welles, who taught us in War of the Worlds that even a good story can motivate people to stand in their backyard with guns looking for the aliens who they truly believe are coming across their back fence.
Kind of amazing.
It is critically important to hold broadcasters and people in control of these things to at least some standards of reality, to mark something that is fantasy as fantasy and not purport it as reality, or even allow people to mistake it, because it motivates actual behavior.
So here's what I don't like about marking it, is that it leaves us with the impression that the other stuff is actually true. And so the thing is that I just think that we should, as a consumer of media, constantly look at everything as probably not true, and then make it prove it. Like make it prove it to us. We have to have the media as consumers. This is what I teach my kids. This is what I teach people around me, is we as consumers should not believe anything that comes out of a screen ever. Not on its, not, and we should not on its own. We should be our own researchers, our own scientists, looking for multiple examples, multiple references, and then coming to a conclusion. But there is nothing that we should believe in one single article about anything. And I've had the opportunity to work on lots of things that have been reported on. So I get to see like what my version of this was, which was a lot closer to the reality, and then a reporter writing about it. There was a situation where, if you go back, search back, and there's not much of it left on the web right now, but in the 2012 election, there was a loud bang during the debates between Romney and Obama in Denver. There was a loud bang, and there was articles for a week about what that loud bang was. It was on Fox, it was on The Blaze, but it was also on, liberal media about how there was a conspiracy, and there was a gunshot, and there was everything else. So like all of these things that were said as if they were true, now I can tell you that what that loud bang was a 1650 Pelican case going over a metal yellow jacket. And the reason I can tell you that was because I was the one pulling it. So the thing is that, so the thing is that a really loud bang right outside an open door that was going into the debate. And so the thing is that, but for me, it was hilarious to watch. I can't say anything about it back, 8 years ago, but it was hilarious to watch this pattern of them. For me, it was like this perfect picture of the press of all these people like making up all of this stuff about what that meant or what it was and what it was. And all it was someone pulling something over something they didn't expect to make so much noise. And so I think that we just have to remember that we shouldn't, things can be labeled or not labeled, but you shouldn't trust any of it. Anything that comes out of a screen or comes out of your radio or comes out of your earphones, you shouldn't trust any of it open hand, as its own. You definitely need to believe things, but you need to discover what those are, looking at things, even looking at sources that you don't agree with, so that you can figure out what those things are, but don't believe anything that you see, Sky.
So holding strong beliefs loosely is a best technique that I've heard.
38 Special. I think 38 Special made a whole song about that. You just applied that to truth.
And then the other aspect of the technique of a person looking into the truth is a prosecutor, and the consequence of hearing the same exact fact coming out of multiple locations often point that that's possibly a lie because it's been memorized as a fact, versus the different perspectives you are seeing from your. And that's why Michael Moore, to me, is the concept of propaganda for his agenda. He's
That's
a
fine.
very wealthy man.
And I don't think,
as an entertainer,
I don't want to get into Michael Moore, but what I will say is that it's fine to create media that gets people thinking. Whether it's Michael Moore or Michael Pollan or all the, like there's not, I don't.
Agreed,
all of these things are, it's good to have content that gets us thinking and gets us thinking about a process, as long as we don't hold on to it like it's the truth. Go ahead, Mike.
And the last thing I wanted to point is John stepped out, but he's back in.
Okay, good. Mike Burns. Then we'll move on.
So I have to say, having worked on reality shows for many years, I'm retired now in Spokane. And when I get together with friends, and I've worked them as a video editor, I produced one. And when I get together, I always look at them and say, you realize that's not real, right? And the look on their face is just priceless every time. And they're like, no, it's real. I'm like, no, I used to produce one. They're not.
Well, even the stuff that's being handed to the press is manufactured. I mean, that's the thing you have to understand, is like what they're being told is manufactured. The tips that they're given, the process, all that stuff is manufactured. And whether they know it or not, it's still being manufactured. And so you just have to, people just have to, again, as someone who's been doing this for 30 years, over 30 years, I can just tell you, you really shouldn't believe it. Like, you shouldn't believe what you're looking at. As someone who has been the person talking on the thing, written the pieces, shot the pieces, worked with the press, manipulated the information, I can just tell you, don't believe anything
Alex,
you see.
Yeah. And that's the key. That's what I was going to say, is the manipulation.
Yeah. It's super important that, and that's the only reason I spend so much time on this, is that I just feel like, holy smokes, do people don't get how off what they're looking at is. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to ask for the next question.
Yep. Next question. Go ahead.
Moving on. The next question comes with some Sky on the panel. I need an FM transmitter for church. Which model to buy for $150? What else do I need? Antennas. I've never done FM short range.
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Make sure, number one, that it's FCC certified. Also make sure it has a SO239 and an RCA antenna connector. A good choice would be the Rolls HRS84. Somebody mentioned Rolls yesterday when I was asking about pocket mixers, but they also make a digital FM tuner. Now, Sky, is this for a drive-in or inside a church? What's the application?
Yes, we will be having people parking in the parking lot because we can't be next to each other. And so we want to broadcast to about 50 to maybe 80 cars in and around the building.
So the antenna is either going to have an RCA output or an SO239. I highly recommend you get an SO239 because you screw it on. It's a PL259 like you'd have on a CB or ham radio antenna. You screw it on. So I would go with the Rolls HRS84 HRS 84. It's $139. You may have to hunt around for it because I see on Amazon it's back ordered till December.
Good.
Can you put a link in the chat? And what's the distance? Is it 300 feet?
Distance, they advertise 200 feet, but your distance is variable based on your antenna. You can build a killer antenna with a lot of gain and get a lot more distance out of very low wattage.
Are those omni or are they directional? Like a
microwave? You can go either way. You can go with a beam. There's a whole variety of antennas. I'll try to find.
This is way deeper than I.
Also.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead, John.
Hey, Paul, yeah, I got a question for you because the church that we're affiliated with is trying to do the same thing, but they want to handle like 200 to 400 people and 200, 400 cars. My engineer was talking to me about it. He said the problem that he sees with it is by the time you get cars in and dead spots and you end up building something with so much power that you're going to need an FCC license. Do you feel like it's going to be the same way on something like that?
It's a narrow line between broadcasting outside your venue and staying within your venue. With a beam antenna, either vertically or horizontally polarized, you can probably engineer it to stay within that radius, but you're going to have to design it. It's going to have to be a designed antenna, and the antenna is the big thing, more so than the radio. You also want to make sure your radio doesn't have spurious emissions. So you want to use good coax and good wire so that you don't have any bleed over or anything like that. I'll try to put some things in the chat, to help
would
out.
Dead spots with basically with signal canceling be a concern to you once it starts bouncing off cars and all that kind of stuff?
Not so much. I think you can pretty much overcome that if you have a good antenna, directional antenna, and
or an omnidirectional in the center of mass.
You can do it.
I mean,
you could combination of omni and directional.
But I think that the thing to think about is an omnidirectional in the center of your parking lot might be as effective as that's relatively high up can get is going to give you a lot more. But we've definitely covered a fair bit of range, especially outside, without a couple watts. And
oh,
again,
really? Okay.
Yeah, it's not. You can get hundreds of feet with a good antenna. Now. It also depends on ease of use and how many people you want to supply. There is a solution for the industrial solution, of course, is a Comtex, right? You give people that they can somehow, that's what the Church of Latter-day Saints did. That's why we have it in Hollywood. It's because they needed to handle languages and broadcast and everything else over large numbers of people. Go ahead, Mickey. Whoop, lost you, Mickey.
The budget constraint was one thing I kept it under
FM
the
is
budget.
FM's easy. I mean, in that sense, and you can get there's a lot, and everybody's got a car. Not everybody, but most people have cars with those, and you can get headsets that are $3 with the or little receivers that are $3 that have headphones that
for $17 they will plug into your cigarette lighter. Little FM transceiver.
And I think the HRS, the Rolls HRS 84 is just a digital tuner. It's not a transmitter. They do make a digital FM transmitter, I think a HR 70 or something, and I'm not sure that's broadcast. HR 70 is a digital transmitter, but it may not be in the broadcast band. I'm not sure.
I would assume I would need a transmitter.
Yeah, I think that's what you're talking about, something that broadcasts within the standard FM broadcast band that can be picked up by a car radio. So
that's what I need.
I mean,
the HR 70 is a transmitter.
The 70 is a transmitter.
And the one that I've used in the past, which is
a receiver.
Which is funny, it popped up as soon as I did a search, probably because I popped up. There's a Sign Stack ST7C FM transmitter for church or drive-in movie. Might be a place to at least look. I
did that in Amazon, and like 35 options showed up, and that's when I just went, well, I gotta go to the crew.
I can tell you that this is the one that I have used this version in the past, an earlier version of it in the past, and it worked. It worked well. It was very awesome. But it was a smaller room. It wasn't a whole. It was a couple hundred. It had to go a couple hundred feet. So that was it.
Yeah, we'll work within the limitations, but again, we're limited budget, but we're wanting to try to figure out how to stake it.
It's $100.
There you go. Can you put that in Bukana, please?
Yep. Go ahead, Nikki.
And to think
Yeah.
that I'm trying to do the same thing that John is doing is, wow.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind, like if sorry, I had a Zoom storm earlier, and I dropped out for like a minute. But yeah, one thing to keep in mind is your friend is height, in terms of not being so much affected by all the metal in the cars. You want your transmitter to be at a good height so that you have essentially line of sight to each antenna of each vehicle. And also take a look at Listen Technologies. They make assistive listening products that are used in like museums and such.
Yep.
And they may have products that may work for your
I
use
think we do
case.
have a hearing impaired, a much smaller version of that already. But, and as you said that, putting the antenna up on the roof sounds like a good idea.
That's why they
All
build
right,
transmitter towers.
Next question.
Moving on. Sky is back with the second one here, and he says, building a lighting grid for Mad in the Kitchen, what diameter pipe should I buy?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Since the rest of the world is metric and the US is not metric, I'm putting a link in the chat for Sky. That's a standard clamp that goes on a standard size pipe. If you get one of those clamps and then go into your local hardware store and try the clamp around the pipe, you will get the right size. Without actually knowing whether it's a metric or an imperial, it fits, it's the right size. You can also get clamps that go between two sections of pipe so that the pipes can cross each other at 90 degrees and clamp those down, and they stiffen everything and stop it. Like putting a roll cage in a car, it adds stiffness, and that's safer.
Speed rail is what I've been told.
So the typical one. Sorry, say it again, Courtney.
I think it's 2 3/8 speed rail.
We've used typically what we've used in the past is 1.5 inch or 1.75 inch speed rail is the typical ones that we've used for those. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, what I see most often is 1.5 inch, and that's inner diameter 1.5 inch.
Yeah. So, and then the most important thing is that your Hollander fittings fit whatever speed rail you get. so that, it doesn't really 1.5 or 1.75 won't matter as much as you getting fittings that are the same as the pipe. So, that's they make them in both sizes. And so it's just a matter of working out those. And that's not a hardware solution. That is that's standard speed rail. And again, we buy everything from Hollander. We don't try to go to the hardware store to buy anything. So that might also, it's a slightly different setup there, but it's
I know
harder
you can't
because
see
you have
very
to order
well,
it.
Alex, but Stephen Kimbrough had his hand up as well.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, it's mainly your local Hollander person. What do they support the best? You've got to do it that way.
Or mail. We just have it all mailed in. We've never found anybody that supplied it locally.
Part of it is being in Northern California, you get it the next day. Seattle, I don't know about Hollander.
Yeah, so
up there.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, we built one in our lobby. I came up with this idea like at 5 o'clock, and by midnight, one of our team members had it built. It was pretty amazing. He just went down to the hardware store. I believe it's 1 inch pipe. But Sky, you've been in the lobby. You might want to drop by and you can take a look at how it's all threaded and everything. But that video that I just posted in chat shows it. We built it. It's about 12 feet long. It's kind of a monster. But I wanted to try putting 12 ring lights in a grid across the lobby, and it looks fantastic. I mean, the output, if you watch that video that I just posted, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah,
that was shot with the Ursa G2.
Now you're using threaded pipe.
Yeah, the tough part's getting it all lined up, and that's where you might want to drop it and have Jason kind of coach you through how he did this. Because I remember him saying something like, "You got to do something special so that they line up correctly at that final tightening."
The problem that I had with threaded pipe specifically, because my little grid at home is the same thing. I'm about to replace it with speed rail, but it was just something I got at the hardware store not 8 months ago or whatever to put something up. It is. The problem is that when you build the grid part where you have multiple ones coming in, you can't tighten it on both ends.
Tightening one is loosening the other.
Tightening one is loosening the other. So that's why speed rail works better, because it slides through. If you do anything with threads, it becomes for me, it became a thing, you know, like it was, and everything is basically half threaded, you know, in the grid, everything's kind of half threaded, which is fine, but not the most, doesn't make me feel the most comfortable if I was in an earthquake. So that was, I don't know how you got over that, guy, but that was all of the stuff that I have is half threaded because of that. And so the preference that I have with unthreaded, which is the speed rail, is that,
that's what it looked like when it was finished.
Right, and that's
at
relatively,
the beginning, it shows the building.
So the hard part is the next piece over. So if you made that wider, that's where it gets hard. So what you have there is actually, I think, relatively easy to do, and that will totally work. And for what Sky is doing, I think that what you're doing could work, but it's the next grid over that becomes hard. So if you did another one of those next to that one and connected both of them with pipe, is where things would becomes complicated.
Yeah.
Guy, dude, you need to get some big drones and fly that over your town.
Yeah,
Colors.
there you go. Next question.
Okay, moving on to Mike Burns from here on the panel. Mike asks, whoops, missed that, hit that. Okay. I do video editing. What's the most affordable piece of software to use to calibrate the colors on my iMac?
I don't know what software you need to calibrate the color. You need hardware, in my opinion. So you need something like a Spider is what we've used in the past. It's not free, but you know, the Spider is what we typically use to calibrate it. I mean, you can get close with just, you know, a variety of pieces of software, but to really calibrate your monitor, you need something that's going to read the monitor and then talk to it. And so what I've used for the last decade probably is a Spider of different versions. I think it's up to Spider 5 now or something like that.
What,
Mike?
What would that run, Alex?
I think it's a couple $100, $200 or $300. And I've had one, you put it on the monitor, you turn it on, you know, there's a couple little things that you hit and then everything looks the same. And it's been the most effective for me anyway. But I don't, does anyone have any experience with software without a piece of hardware to monitor it?
No, I'll just say that the one thing that has changed over the course of time, it used to be that you needed like a Sony Q-Phosphor monitor to make sure that everything was right. But now I think most eyeballs are on either iDevices or the equivalent on the Android platform. And I know that Apple at least has a managed color pipeline. And if you're looking at it on a relatively new iPhone or iPad, that's pretty much what everybody else is going to see. So that's kind of my confidence monitor now at the end of a color pipeline.
For streaming, I won't trust anything in the pipeline except for my phone. Or my iPad. Like I literally stream out, and I don't want to make any final commitments to what the color is going to look like until I see it on my phone or my iPad. And because it's the color that I trust the most. Go ahead, Stuart.
No, there is no software that will do it without hardware, because you need the hardware as the sensor to look at the screen.
Yeah.
So it's an air gap problem. But I'd just like to point out that there are professional laptops like the one that I'm sitting in front of at the moment, which is a Lenovo W541, that you can get the ColorWrite sensor as one of the optional add-ins. So you load the software up, it closes the lid, it does a test and resets your color outputs of your screen on your laptop. So if you are editing on the road, you can get close to decent colors or color accuracy in your display. You just got to go looking for that option, and it's professional laptops, not gaming laptops.
Next question.
Moving on, and this one comes from Jeff.
Mickey, did you have a last little note?
Oh.
Yeah, and just to Stuart's point, when you're on the road and your lighting environment changes, you oftentimes have to recalibrate because the spiders take the ambient light into account when it does its calibration.
Go ahead, Bill.
Jeff Francis of Columbia, South Carolina asks, using several HyperDeck Studio Minis to record ISOs, how do I get the same time code on each to sync them up later?
I think that you need to insert the time code into the SDI signal. You have to have the time code. It doesn't have any. I don't think it has an external reader. Go ahead, Courtney.
Isn't there I have one of these, but it's been in storage so long I haven't looked at it. Isn't there a reference input? And I think if you put the empty time code into the reference input, it'll latch onto that from one, you know, all of them, feed all of them the same reference in.
Yeah, it could. I have to admit, with the minis, we haven't spend as much time. We use those as playback systems and less as record systems. And so I'm less experienced in syncing them up as I am with the other ones. So you're trying. How many do you have, Jeff?
I can pull 4 from our different systems if I needed to do this ISO thing.
Right. So that
and
would
they could all be networked.
Right. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Mickey.
I need to replace the batteries in this mouse. Jeff, just looking at the Blackmagic website, yes, there's reference in. That will be where your time code goes.
There you go.
On the back of those. So any GPS sourced time code generator out through a signal DA out to all of the devices.
Yep.
Just the same as sending Genlock through a truck.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep. Next question.
We're at Guy Blanc of Bruges, Belgium, asks, following office hours practically daily with audio through my laptop speaker. So often there's a mention about background noise from the panel member's location. I know hearing does not improve with age, but I never hear what is pointed out. That's where the question ends.
We're very sensitive to lots of little. I think the fact that we have so many good mics and so many good environments, and that we pick at it. We do a mic check every day. I think we just hear lots of little things that you wouldn't normally hear. Go ahead, Jeff.
And just about everybody here on the panel is monitoring through headphones, so our environment is isolated. So the fact that he's listening through his laptop speaker, he's not going to hear noises because the noise of his environment is probably going to swamp the noises that we're talking about.
Right. Next question.
Moving on to Alton Christensen of Brooklyn. And Alton asks, I've noticed Filmic Remote app doesn't seem to be available to M1-based Big Sur Macs. Anyone else seeing this too? It'd be helpful to have the app available on desktop. Does anyone know the developers who can make that happen?
I would just say that the M1 is really new. So I doubt, knowing Filmic, it will be probably available as soon as they've checked it. I think a lot of developers pulled stuff out to make sure that they had time to make sure that it works well. But it's, they're just barely shipping. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't it just start shipping? Yeah, give them a couple of days or a week or so.
Give them until Thanksgiving at least.
Well, I think people think that like OS builds, which do get shipped out to developers because they have to take the time to write code, hardware, I think everybody kind of outside of the internal core of Apple gets it all at the same time. Yeah, so everybody's rushing. My
guess is that Filmic probably has a Mac Mini or something that they just got this week, and they're probably just checking, and it probably works fine, but they're not going to. A smart developer will pull it off to make sure that it's working before they start letting everybody, before they start getting a bunch of. Here's what developers are worried about: is a bunch of bad ratings, on their in the store. There's a whole bunch of one stars. Oh, this doesn't work. I downloaded it. It's stupid. And so if they're smart, they'll pull it off. And pull it away and make sure that it's absolutely rock solid before they put it back on, because their reputation will affect affect their sales forever. Go ahead, Mike, and then Stephen.
Yeah, I would say super quick, like just email them. I emailed the guys at Camo and they were like incredible. They wrote back with me like a page of really good information. So just email them directly.
Yep, Stephen, real quick.
Well, they said they did this in Swift, so we'll find out here shortly, because if they're in Swift, it's quick. If they have not, it'll be slow.
Mickey?
Yeah, I mean, they probably had the developer kit, but most likely they would have had just one of them. So if they want to test it out a bit more thoroughly before releasing it to the public, they would want just a little more time.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to Jeff Francis from the panel here at Columbia, South Carolina. ATEM Television Studio Pro 4K. Each SDI input has a corresponding SDI output. Are these loop through of individual inputs or all program feed for feeding program back to cameras? Do these SDI outs contain program audio?
Which one are you?
TV Studio Pro 4K. It's an 8-input all SDI. So each of the SDI inputs has an SDI output. Probably just need to hook a monitor up to this and see what they have. But
I have not.
Manual seems.
I think they're.
Sorry, Jeff, what do you say with the manuals?
It talked about going back to camera with the program into the program input of a camera.
Right. It has. I think it carries the camera the mix minus. That's an important thing, and it carries that camera's output with camera controls. I think that can then control the the lens and the other inputs and the other adjustments to the camera.
And I think that one of the reasons for the return is I believe that they're able to return a mix minus. I think that that's where you can actually, if you have them all individual returns, on inputs, it can send back a mix minus. A good guy.
Yeah, all of those inputs are coming back out programmed. None of them loop back through the camera. So like camera one wouldn't loop back in camera one. It's always programmed, because what it is for those studio monitors, so that you can frame up your graphics. Like if you're doing a super source with 4 up, somebody's head's to the side, you can see what you're doing, especially if the director's yelling in your ear, like, move left, and you're moving to the right because you're seeing, mirror. So yeah, it's always programmed on all of those inputs. It does not loop through.
So all 8 of them are the same output.
They're the same video output, but one of the things I haven't explored that much is there's a little setting in the ATEM that I keep on looking at going, oh, I wonder, and so one of the things about it is that there's a mix minus return that is in the ATEM switchers, in the setup, that I believe will, if it's got audio coming in from one, it'll actually not send it. I think that those individual outputs might be the same video, but a slightly different audio mix. So you may want to take a look at that. And it's not something I've done. It's just something I've seen in the menus as I went by, thinking that'd be really interesting, for bringing people in and letting them talk to each other. So if you wanted to send back that video frame so that people could interact with each other, of having a mix minus, I think that it's a built-in mix minus, and that's why they're separate, but I'm not 100% sure. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just quickly, for anybody who hasn't worked in broadcast chains, because I know we've got a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds as attendees. The reason you send program back to a camera is so that the camera operator can see what's on air and they know when to move. There's a little button on the remote controls that go on the handle. It's marked VTR, that's video tape return. I know tape is out of date statement, but the camera operator will hit that, and then they can see what the director is putting to air rather than what's on their camera. So they know that when they see their camera's vision, they've got to be on the ball. Their camera is the movements that matter. Once their camera goes off air and it switches to the next camera, they know it's safe to move. That's what VTR return is. That's why you feed program back to a camera.
Mickey?
And yeah, just to add to what Stuart was saying, it's also handy for, like, say, news broadcasts where they oftentimes keep like a third of the image with the graphic. So, and the operator has to pan either to the left or to the right to make room for that graphic. So that's another reason why seeing the program out is important. And if I recall correctly as well, that those SDI outs are what allows the cameras to get tally information from the switcher, and also to allow talkback.
So the tally and talkback to the cameras as PLs will come back even if you only have one output going out of the switcher. So if you have a single output that you're distributing to all the cameras, camera control, tally, and talkback will go out to, you can't talk to an individual camera, but typically there's 2 PLs that go out, either 1 or 2 PLs that go out to the cameras. If you have the fiber back on, you'll have 2 PLs. If you have the, and those are using, I believe, I want to say channels 13 and 14 or something like that on the way back. So there's a couple channels that are used up at the end of the SDI chain to send those back, and those can be shared across the cameras. And again, tally will be shared across the cameras, because what's happening is that they're sending the data, the tally data, camera control data is being, now the audio, if you're using 2 channels of the audio is being used, the SDI, the tail end of the SDI chain of the 16 channels. They're using, I believe, 13 through 16 for back and forth for those things. But the tally information and the camera control information is using the bank data that captions normally takes up. So line 21. and it sends it back. And what it's doing is it's sending all of the information for all the cameras along that return. And the cameras, that's why it's so important that you name your camera 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because 6 knows to look for the data that's coming to it for, it'll say, camera 6, and then here's the data, and camera 4, here's the data. And it's sending all of that back at the same time. And the cameras know which one to grab onto, but based on what camera number you've given them inside of the setup. So you don't need that individual return for each camera to get tally and shading, but you do need it. Again, I believe if there's a mix minus built in, you would need it for that because it's using the audio chain there. And also it'll share the comms across all the cameras through the SDI return. All right, next question.
We're moving on to
go ahead,
a
Jeff,
mic
real quick. Sorry.
I just wanted to say that's why we love office hours, because a simple question about my little problem expands into a whole field of production.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's great. And we just discuss it, like we and we're all learning from each other. Each one of us has, I was like, I don't remember how to do the reference for the minis. It's not any one person. It's great. Anyway, thanks, Jeff. Next question.
Well, Mike Burns is in. He's marked it video, and I know we normally do video today. Today is actually lenses, so I thought maybe we should handle this one here in the regular. He's using portrait mode on an iPhone 12 using camo and wonders how he looks. He's here in orange in the panel.
It looks good.
But are you dropping frames, he asks. Am I dropping frames, essentially? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line. And this is, having worked down at Apple for several years, when they started doing computational photography, I was like, oh my God, it would be amazing if they started doing that with video. And here Camo's doing it with video. I'm just curious to know how it looks. Do you guys?
It looks good. It looks good.
The defocus thing is doing a weird. Are you using some kind of background? You're not in a green screen.
Yeah. So let me switch it for you guys. So no green screen, and I'm not using the Zoom software either. This is my actual background, as you guys know. So there, it's off, and then now we kick on the portrait mode with that. It's Apple reminding me that it's an. No, it's the Camo software that's doing it.
Okay. Right, it's taking advantage of the data.
When you refer to portrait mode, I was confused. I thought you meant the phone was vertical, but you mean it's where it does fake bokeh.
Short depth. Go ahead, Stuart.
Fake bokeh.
Yeah, and again, it's running off my iPhone 12.
It does look like you're dropping frames intermittently.
A little bit, right? Yeah, that's what I would guess, Alex.
Yep. Go ahead, Stuart.
Mike, looking at the color of your shirt, and I think Sky noticed it before, there's a blur to the edges of your shoulders, and that would be the shirt versus the color of the wall and the color of the desk at the background.
That's
pretty impressive.
I probably picked the wrong day to wear orange with this, but I'm a big fan of the MS Society, so I'm wearing my colors.
So we're gonna move into speed round. We're gonna move into a
little sharper.
We're going to move into speed round. We're running out of time. We're going to go a little heavy into the lens discussion because there's not a ton of lens questions. And so I don't think so. We're going to
hint.
Yeah. So if you have lens questions, this is the time. We're going heavy because there's not a lot of lens questions. So no pressure, but go ahead. And then but we're going to move pretty quickly through the next set of questions. Go ahead.
Okay. We're going to move on to Tyler, who says, do you know of a way to exposure bend video? This is done in photography where you blend multiple exposures of the same still without masking. I figure it's possible if you're shooting video in ProRes RAW, trying to attempt to look similar to The Hobbit.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I guess he's talking about HDR, but with video. I've seen people do it like probably 8-10 years ago with footage from 2 Reds, and they did it in Resolve.
And in general, that's been kind of tone mapping. We have HDR now. I mean, what we're doing with cameras now is not so much when we're shooting in log, we're shooting enough to gather that information and then return it back as HDR. So we don't need multiple exposures for video to do that, and that would be very difficult. What we can actually do now is actually just acquire all that information and then basically you're compressing it down in what we call tone mapping to whatever to the screen dynamic range that's available to you. And right now that screen dynamic range on a phone is over 1,000 nits on an iPhone or many of the Apple devices. But a typical TV is 100 nits, and you have to tone map it back to that. Mickey and then Courtney, real quick.
Yeah, this was back in the time of the Mysterium, original Mysterium
Yeah.
sensor on the red ones. And people were experimenting with it with the same beam splitter setups used for 3D.
No, a lot
So
of us were
they would,
spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to
yeah.
do this, and now it just comes with the phone. You know, like
Now 13 to 15 stops of dynamic range on Alexis, and you can feed that to the audience.
And then what you're doing is to get that out of your camera. And let's say you're using a Blackmagic camera. That's what your LUT is for. Your lookup table is saying, I got all this information, and how am I going to limit that information so that it comes back out to you? So whether you're pushing that to a BT 2020 or a 709 or extended video, which is kind of a low contrast 709. So those are all things that you can decide, but those are, I mean, you have the capability now of basically putting out, a lot of cameras have the capability of putting out what essentially, with that lookup table, essentially putting out high dynamic range or HDR that's tone mapped to whatever you've decided you're going to send it out to. It's a lot of power, and it's also a lot of responsibility. It's much more complicated than it was when it was just 709. Go ahead, Courtney, and then John.
I thought what he was asking about is because he mentions the Hobbit in there, which was HFR, high frame rate. 48 frames, which temporarily smooths out the action. I think he's asking if that you can use an exposure blend instead of a frame rate blend to maybe have different, switch the, I don't know if this is even possible, switch the ISO on the sensor, oversample, and switch the ISO on the sensor between frames, and then average the exposure value between those different samples for each frame.
I mean, I think
that would be an exposure blend, but I don't know if anything actually does that.
I mean, I think that what we're going to see is a lot more cameras coming out at 120 frames a second, because 120 frames per second is evenly divisible by a lot of different frame rates, 24, 30, 60, so shooting in those and then rebuilding the motion blur based on, being able to use interpolation, which is a very well-known set of algorithms.
That's what they did on the Hobbit to release the 24 frame versions.
Yeah. So the thing is that you can, but 120 frames a second was going to give you that, and doesn't mean that you're going to display it at 120 frames a second. But if you capture it there, there's a lot of things for effects and compositing that 120 frames makes it easier because we have a lot less motion blur to work with. So, and then reinterpolating that is something that I think we're going to see more of as we think about computational photography and computational video. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, that technique that Courtney was talking about, wherein it's alternating between two exposures. That was actually a thing that Red did back in the DSMC2 era, like back in the Epic era, and it didn't really catch on. Nobody really did it.
The temporal changes as you start to do that. If things aren't moving very much, it works great. But as soon as they start moving a lot, it becomes a pretty challenging approach. Next question.
Mike Burns is back with, can Mickey explain what happens when we turn on original sound in Zoom?
Short.
Yeah, when we turn on original sound, depending on what you have checked in the settings in Zoom, it'll first disable the noise suppression, the automatic noise suppression that Zoom is doing. Secondly, if you have it checked, it's going to disable the echo cancellation in Zoom. And then also, if you have high fidelity music mode enabled, it will do that. And also if you have stereo audio enabled, stereo audio checked, it will also do that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
They've actually moved the noise suppression out of original sound. You can't turn noise suppression off. You can only set it to low, and that's independent of the original sound. So the echo cancellation can be disabled, but not the noise suppression.
But we are seeing, I mean, we do definitely see when you turn turn original sound off, we definitely, a lot of things like hiss and other things are removed, but that may be, you're saying that's a separate thing at this point.
Yeah, there's a separate suppressed background noise.
Right.
That's different than echo cancellation.
Next question.
Moving on to Andy Dolph of Durham, New Hampshire, and he says, for remote presenters at various locations, could you talk about the signal flow using multiple Zoom room machines, both for the local operator control of the Zoom room machines and comms?
Yeah, so the way we do it is we have an individual computer for every person with a Zoom room. That Zoom room has a Samsung, it's a Dell 1U with the i7 and usually typically a Blackmagic Duo card for input. we're just using DisplayPort to HDMI to some kind of HDMI to SDI output converter to get to the SDI outs from the computer. We control those with the cheapest Samsung tablet we can find. Usually they're about 110, $120 that we use for each room. You can kind of trade them along, but we just each room has its own tablet. And then those rooms, the folks come in and we take that isolated output. We have 2 outputs from the computer. That allows us to get in the Zoom room, in the web interface, you can say this output is going to be the other person and this output's going to be their screen share. And by doing that, we can take their screen share and them at 1080p out. We don't, as long as no one else connects to that room. So we get, if it's a point-to-point, it'll be a 1080p connection. And then those go in. Now, as far as returns go, those all have Dante virtual cards on them. So that's, we're taking Dante to send it back to them. How you do comms, we do it with ClearComm, but you could definitely do it with, Unity as a way. You could definitely build a Unity system that would do that return as well. So it's just a matter of having that comms. The only thing we'd say is that we don't manage the comms in the same mixer that we manage the show, and that's mostly because we want to make sure that we don't there's no chance that we would accidentally push comms into the show, which would be bad. So so basically we send stuff from the mixer to another mixer. In this case, we use the Eclipse, the actual ClearComm mixer to do that, but you could send it to another mixer there. And then we return those back into that room. The advantage of doing that point-to-point is not only do we get isolated audio from the individuals, but we're able to talk to them during the show without them having any extra phone or anything else, because we're sending basically the whole show mix minus them, so we don't send them back to themselves, plus anything else we want to add into it, which turns out to be our comms, which could be just literally a microphone that you have. You don't need, without Unity or anything else, you have a little microphone that just connected to it that just adds to that return. You just have to figure out a way to do that. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Mickey. And then
I was only confused by one thing in your explanation is the Samsung tablets. Are you using that in lieu of a KVM on the individual Dells?
No, the rooms require an external controller. So if you're using Zoom rooms, you need an external controller. It can be an iPad, it can be a tablet, but you need something that's going to. Guy showing you what that looks like. You need that controller to run the rooms.
I see. So that has to be logged in, Alex, on each Zoom room.
Yeah. What was the good news?
With the new version, this is actually the web interface. So now you can go in here and you can say,
that's great.
Launch controller. So anybody in the world could now have that awesome controller, which is
so that's brand
cool.
new.
So you can have somebody pinning.
Virtual iPad.
Yeah.
That's great.
So you can pin people. And
the tablets were so painful. It's just not. Yeah, that's amazing. The tablets are amazingly painful to use.
Alex is going to have a sale on $100 Samsung.
Yeah, the $50 Samsung tablets. Let me get rid of these now. Go ahead, Mickey.
Just curious, like during your productions, it might vary, of course, from production to production, but generally, do you guys keep like a comms engineer during the show, like specific to that, or not really?
We have Maddox, Brian Maddox. So
okay.
Brian
so
Maddox
he's handling
manages
the show and comms.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah,
Nice.
and I don't know if I would do that with very many people, but Brian is able to pretty seamlessly run both of those things, and he's run our comms and audio. Anytime he's on our shows, he's running both because the way and because he's so skilled in both of those. And he used to work for me full time in our studio in DC, and his understanding of how they all mix together is so deep that he's one of the few people that I would feel comfortable with doing both. Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a competent engineer can do it. It's just like for myself, like if I am mixing a show, I want my hands on the fader, and if there's a fire going on with comms, I don't want to leave the fader of the show.
Yeah, and for the most part, we don't change much in comms during a show. He can, but most of the time, it's all like the clients get on and we get on and we're talking to people and it'd be really good if I routed something else to my ClearComm panel. They've got their little agent IC open and they want 3 more little buttons, and all that happens typically in rehearsal. So we do rehearsals the day before for most of our shows. So in rehearsal, there's a whole bunch of, this button wasn't exactly where I wanted it. And we need an extra PL or we need whatever. So that's part of what rehearsals are. People think of rehearsals as the hosts getting good at it, but a lot of it is us tweaking all the pipelines so that we know that, we didn't expect them to do that. And given that, let's put these 3 other things in and so on and so forth. So most of that stuff that you're talking about, Mickey, would happen. We very rarely change the comms during a show. That would create chaos. So it's really figuring out, moving up towards the show, you know, what needs to happen. And there's meetings and things and talk discussion of PLs and spreadsheets of these are all the people and this is what they get, you know. So each column is every person's like little agent IC panel or physical panel has a little list of the PLs that they're on and the individual point to points that they get, stuff like that. Next question.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Alton Christensen of Brooklyn asked the next one, and I guess he's hearkening back to the church radio discussion and the drive-in kind of environment. And I think Sky's gone, so that's too bad. But he was wondering if they could make a deal.
Sky's here.
Keep going.
Sky
keep going.
here?
We got to
Oh,
keep moving. We got to keep moving. Keep moving.
Okay,
Get
make
to
a
the
deal.
question.
Wonder if they can make a deal with the local radio station to actually broadcast the service, solves the problems, widens the audience.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm just wondering if a CCLI license covers radio broadcasts. So that may be the only issue is the music that they're playing in the service.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but a partnership other than that, a partnership with them could make it. Go ahead, John.
It'll also depend on the station itself. Since we broadcast a lot on different things, if you're doing music, the station's actually holding the ASCAP BMI and CSAC licensing. You shouldn't necessarily have to worry about it. And live performances will normally roll up underneath that, so there shouldn't be an issue with it as long as the station is cool with partnering with you.
Oh, that's great. Stuart.
Depending on your local area, a certain amount of religious content is mandated in some broadcast licenses. I'd have a quick look at that and see if your local broadcasters need to meet their obligations for their license and offer to provide them the audio.
Not in the U.S. anymore. That got killed.
And in general, though, radio stations staying relevant is a useful thing. So having a thing that they can provide a service to the community, especially if they're a local radio station, it's actually a really good idea because, again, I can't remember the last time I listened to a radio station. All right, next question.
Moving on to Aunt Pruitt's question. Safe to say that Premiere After Effects is targeting the indie filmmaker since its current HDR post-processing tech is still a work in progress? He has a question mark after that. So he's looking to find out if that's true. And he's a full suite Creative Suite Cloud subscriber. Good discussion, he notes.
I think the problem that they have is that they probably are targeting that. And the issue that they have is so is Final Cut and Resolve. You know, like the challenge is that After Effects and Premiere are behind in HDR. They are behind in that pipeline. They, you know, when people say they're going to deliver something to me in Premiere, I'm like, ooh, that's going to be hard. You know, like, and how about you send me an EDL and we'll put it back together in Resolve. You know, so especially if you're doing something high end. And so I think that the problem is that you want to use Resolve for a lot of the high end complex pieces, and you want to use Final Cut for a lot of the fast and furious, and they both cost $600, which is the yearly thing that you're paying for your Creative Suite. And so I think that they're in a challenging position. I do think that, you know, Hollywood has a position and it's doing all those things, but it's a very top part of a huge pyramid of content creators that are buying things, and that top keeps on getting smaller and the bigger piece has more money. So I think that they're in a challenging position. I think that they have legacy code that's going to be very hard to move over and take full advantage of things like the M1 chip and so on and so forth. So I think that there's just a lot of challenges. I'm not saying that Adobe can't figure it out, but I think their subscription model puts them in behind the 8 ball. You know, people like me I still have a Adobe Creative subscription, but every day I'm trying to get out of it because I'm just tired of making payments. You know, like, and so I think that's, you know, and admittedly their hardware is, I mean, their software is old, you know, and you can feel it when you use it, you know, that it's legacy code. It needs to be rewritten from the ground up. And that's a really hard thing to do when your market is actually getting smaller. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just for clarity for everyone listening, when you say both, do you mean each one is $600 or that together they're $600?
I think the creative is like $50 a month or something like that. For
$600 a year.
Yeah, $600 a year. But you could get both Resolve and Final Cut for 1 year of Creative Suite. So, and the Creative Suite's got a lot of other things, I admit, but if you're an editor,
I actually meant
what you need.
Resolve and Final Cut. Are they $600 each, or together are they $600?
$300 each. Together they're $600. And there's no upgrade costs ever. There hasn't been in the past. Next question.
And if you
And
take
we're
a
gonna-
community college course, you get student discount, and they're $200 for everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
We've got
and-
lots
oh.
of lens questions now stacked up, so we're going to answer.
Yeah.
We're going to answer these really fast. I don't know how many we have left, but it'll just be like 1 minute each. Go ahead.
John Preto, Las Vegas. I was watching CNN last night during Anderson Cooper's segment. I noticed he was blinking often. I timed him. He averaged about 50 blinks a minute. It seems to be about 5x more than his guests that were on. Anybody notice this as well? I used to have that problem in air-conditioned studios because your eyes dry out.
It's like compression, Alex. Once you see it, you can't unsee it anymore. It's super distracting.
So, an odd thing in studios, people with blue eyes will blink out more often because their eyes are more light sensitive, and so it's just something to. I mean, it's something that the known thing on our end. You have to be the light structure has to be different for them, and sometimes that's hard to manage. But I've noticed that Anderson Cooper blinks a lot in general. But blue eyes tend to blink more than brown eyes because they actually absorb more light. They're more light sensitive. So we've seen that in the past, and we've had issues with talent that really are sensitive to light. And when they show up and they have these bright blue eyes, we know part of the reason is actually genetic, that they're more sensitive to it. But typically it's to the point it's dry or lights that are brighter. And that can be, a lot of times that can be handled now with non-broadcast cameras. And there's a lot of ways to handle that where you can have a lot less light, you have bigger sensors, you have more, there's ways to bring that down, but broadcasters don't think that way generally. So they don't think about how do we tweak and make everything just perfect, even though we are spending millions of dollars on that person, and they've, but I think that dryness and brightness are the two things that usually have people blink more often. Yeah, but it's good observation. And yes, you've ruined it for all of us, or for everybody who hadn't noticed it already. Next question.
We're a little bit back in the territory of before. Peter Rosato in Las Vegas says, good morning. Related to the current A. Mitchell's question, does the panel believe that the sponsor aspect of news reporting affects how it's reported? I vaguely remember a mention of news networks being different when they were a loss leader versus sponsor.
I think we beat that one into the ground. We're gonna move on to lenses, given that we're in the second hour already. That one could be another 20 minutes, and then Jeff Francis would ask me to move on. So anyway, I think we're on to lenses. I only have a couple more minutes, so I want to get into talking about lenses and let everyone else then run with that information. I have to go to a production again. So let's jump into the lens questions.
Okay, the first one. This comes from Raphael Jacquot, I guess, of Grenoble. I'm planning on getting a Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Would be using it with an EFS 1835 that came with my Canon 500D. I also have a Canon 70-200 f4. Which lens should I buy next for daily use?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yes, those lenses will work with the Canon cameras or with the Blackmagic cameras. I actually read the question wrong before and realized he was asking about camera.
But I believe he has a 4K, which is micro Four Thirds.
Right, so he's going to get some
crop
crop
factor.
factor.
Wouldn't matter. BMD's lens control is beautiful for Canon lenses. They might as well be on Canon cameras. It's that good. But an 18-55 is like the wide end of the zoom, and the 70-200, they're both slow lenses. The one that will teach you the best habits is actually Canon's Nifty 50, the plastic 50 mil that's like about a 1.8 f-stop. It will teach you good habits, but just be aware that the focusing element on the front of it is a pain because of how slender it is. It's very much, it's like a ring on the front rather than actually a ring on the body.
Yeah. If I was going to pick a handful of Canon camera lenses, I'll just kind of list the range that I use, that I've used for a long time. And that is the 16-35, 25-70, 70-200, and 100-400. And that's kind of that list of lenses gets me after that I rent. And I have a 50-50. I have the 50 to Stuart's point. I have that 50. But and then I have a fixed 35 that I use for photogrammetry because I don't want it to change. So, and I played with a couple other fixed ones, but for the most part, that range of the 16-35, 24-70, 70-200, 100-400 And then you get doubler for the 100, 400. You take pictures of birds a long way away. That little family of lenses has done me really well as a photographer. I mean, you can get lots of primes and you can do a lot of other things, but you can take those out and get an enormous range of photos in a relatively small bag. The biggest one obviously being the 100 or 400 is a big lens. Anyway, and all of those, the ones that I have are all 2.8. So they're not f4, they're 2.8. And to get back to like we're talking about lenses, having that when that number goes down, that low number goes down, it's going to become a more expensive piece of glass because it's harder to do that. So it gets, the lenses, all the lenses that I listed there are probably in $1,000 to $2,000 range each. So it's a commitment, but that's where you're going to get. The f4 is going to have a different depth of field. Now, the other thing is that where the center of sharpness is on that lens is usually in the middle of its f range. So on a 2.8, your sharpest point on the lens tends to be about 5.6, is where everything in the frame is going to be as sharp. If you do f4, your sharpest point is going to be higher, f8, that kind of thing. And so you just have to remember that it's not just how open it can get, but where is it the sharpest, within that lens range. It's not equal. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just one extra point for Raphael, since he's got the 500D, get a copy of Magic Lantern installed onto your SD card. It will transform the camera and what it can do, and it will teach you more about the limits of what the camera can do. It's a brilliant piece of software to add onto a Canon.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, as with so many things, so many questions here, my answer would be it depends. It depends what you're shooting. It seems like based on what lenses you have now, you are more into zooms and you probably need zooms more. So I agree with Alex. I think what's missing right now, if you weren't to replace any of the lenses in your current arsenal, what's missing right now is somewhere in the mid-range zoom. So yeah, I would go with the 24 to 70 2.8L L2.
Yeah, and the 24 to 70 is the most used lens that I have. In fact, it's what I'm using right now. So this is a 24 to 70 right now that's in front of me. And so I think that it's probably the lens that if I'm going to carry it around, like I'm going to walk through London or Rome or whatever, that is the most common lens that I'll have. If I have to pick one, I'm going to pick that lens. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, for me, like whenever I travel, I carry the 16 to 35 and also the 24 to 70, and that takes care of my needs. But that's on a full frame sensor, though.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on. The next question comes from Andy Dahl from Durham, New Hampshire. Lenses. What could you give a basic intro of what to expect when using photo lenses versus video lenses on a Blackmagic Design Studio camera and so forth? Is the motorized zoom on the photo lens usable for video?
Go ahead, Stuart.
First thing, DSLR lenses, and I have examples with me, will be a pain to focus. This is just a generic Sigma lens, but you can see if I hold my fingers there and rotate, that's the maximum amount of range that I've got. That's like 90 degrees for focus. Whereas if I grab a Pentax 35mm SLR lens from Film Mirror that's fully manual and I rotate the lens, that gives you more range and more accuracy when you're doing fine focus pulls, having the extra degrees of rotation.
Well, and in general,
that's almost 180 degrees. And that's one of the big things that will change with the difference between video lenses and SLRs. SLRs are all built to be automatic and controlled from the camera, whereas cinema and TV lenses are built to be controlled by an operator. So they have much more finer pitch controls.
And it's not just finer pitch, it's servos. So when you see a camera with a servo, it means that I've got a thing that I can use to I can focus it, but I can do so slow zooms and go in and out nice and smoothly because there's a motor that is built for that lens to do that. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, just to add on a little bit to what Stuart said, the movement on, like, say, both the focus, the zoom, and also the iris on lenses that are designed for film or TV use, the movement on those are really designed to be able to move smoothly during like a continuous capture of image, as opposed to still lenses that it's designed to get to a setting, stop there real quick, and catch just a still.
And in general, when we use still lenses, I do use still lenses when we make a financial decision that we're going to use some still lenses on some video cameras. Generally, our pattern of shooting changes is that we're not going to do a bunch of zooms, we're not going to do a bunch of focuses, rack focuses, and so on and so forth. That's something that we stopped doing when we moved to still lenses. Doesn't mean you can't create a great show. It just means that you're taking that out of we generally will take that out of the pipeline. Now you can get things like red rod micro and controllers where you attach them to the lens and you move them in, but they're never going to look the same. It's never going to be as smooth. And we do that more for ease of use, where we can have handle controls and so on and so forth, than we do that we're actually going to focus and shoot, focus and zoom while we're shooting. Go ahead, Sky, and then Bill.
Well, I just realized, John, you have both a studio experience and a live event experience all in the same week. And so I'd be very curious what you've got, what, dozens of cameras in your
Well,
live
yeah,
event?
basically, Alex was saying exactly how we handle it. I mean, if it depends upon what the situation is. If it's a live shoot, if it's something along those lines, then we're going to be going with, and we can afford it. I mean, it's always boils down to budget, isn't it? I mean, that's what everything boils down to, is what's your budget. But if you're going to be going, we used, particularly on international trips, we will use smaller cameras or, SLR lenses, because to be quite blunt, you don't get pulled over by people or get your equipment confiscated nearly as quickly when you're shooting with those. But when those situations, it's absolutely more film style. It's set the shot up, know what you're going to do, and our DP, he can. Those guys, they actually can do rack focuses. Don't ask me to do it. It looks atrocious and usually I'll overexpose the shot if I'm using an SLR lens. But those guys have got the experience and can do it. But so.
Your Sunday morning experience is what, 12 cameras?
8 cameras. It's 8. It's 8 cameras, but that's all very much traditional live camera studio stuff with standard TV lenses on it. But yeah, it's bad. I echo what Alex said, and actually what Mickey said too earlier when the guy was asking about which lens should I buy next. What are you doing? That's what it always boils down to, is what are you doing? And then how much does it cost, and what do you got in the budget? That's what it gets down to. I'll say this all the time: is Hollywood feature films aren't spending that money because they want to spend the money. They're doing it because they're trying to get a specific look, and they're trying to do something very specific. If they could get away with SLR lenses and get the look that they want, they'd do it. They're trying to make money. Let's face facts.
And when you start really renting big lenses or shooting with big lenses, you realize there is a difference. It's not like you need them all the time, but you get a big old zoom lens at $70,000 lens. It feels like a 70. Most of them, there's a level of control and sharpness and everything else. It's not that you're getting the same thing. I think it's easy for us as indie filmmakers. When I started, I was like, oh, it's the same thing. It's just as sharp. It's just but there's creature comforts that come with it that produce a better product. When you get into the bigger lenses. But I'm like shooting a lot of stuff. I shoot a lot of stuff still with still lenses, and it's a financial decision. Go ahead, Bill.
And the broadcast servo lenses, one thing you hear us talk about back focus occasionally, that's setting the distance between the back of the lens and the sensor. And if you get the back focus set right on a broadcast lens, you can go completely wide and do a push all the way into somebody at the tail end of a very long telephoto shot, and the whole thing will be in focus throughout the entire broadcast, entire zoom range. It's that kind of convenience that you don't get with manual DSLR lenses.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, just to go back to what John and Alex was saying earlier, and this also links up to our earlier discussion regarding NLEs. It's the right tool for the job.
Yep.
There's no one size fits all.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Moving on to Eric Hull this time, Mount Vernon, Washington. How important is it to videographers to pull focus once and have it stay throughout the zoom range of the lens? Well, there we go.
We
That's
just talked
what
about
we're
that.
just talking about.
And I have to bid everybody adieu. You have a good crew here to keep on answering these questions. I'm going to go play with some cameras, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow morning. All right, thanks, guys.
Adios, Alex. Have a good afternoon.
Get an In-N-Out burger for me, please.
Okay, Stuart has his hand up. You want to dive in on that last one, Stuart?
Okay, that one what we just covered and a little bit of the next question all cover whether a lens is parfocal or varifocal.
Should I read that next one so we can combine them? Do you want to combine them, Stuart?
Well, I can sort of ramble and cover it.
Okay.
But as a cinematographer, videographer, and what have you, to keep it in focus, especially covering things like sports, is absolutely essential. That is what the client is paying for, especially on sports. If you're panning sideways, say following a horse race or a race car up the back straight of a racetrack, and you've got to be spot on, you need that thing to be able to stay in focus all the way, regardless of whether you're wide or you're tight, and it is essential. Now, DSLR lenses, traditionally when you focus, the barrel extends and you lose, or sorry, when you zoom, the barrel extends and you lose focus. There is one exception to that, and you won't find these everywhere. If you get a push-pull lens, where there's no rotation, it's not geared or anything, these tend to be parfocal. They do not come up for sale very often, but they will enable somebody to have a lightweight package that will stay in focus when you're zooming. Where were we? Parfocal lenses, ENG style. Yes, they will fit on Blackmagic cameras, on Red cameras, as long as you can get an adapter, which I digress to.
Yeah, just remember that there's two things. The Blackmagic Studio 6K, which is usually popular right now, has the EF Canon mount, their full frame mounts, and then the other 4Ks have micro four thirds. So there's two different lens mounts, and those do not mix unless you use an adapter. Keep going, Stuart.
Speaking of mounts and adapters, this is the factory mount that comes on the Scion camera. You can see from where the PL lens mounts to the back of the camera, and the sensor sits a little bit further behind. That's what's called the flange focal distance. This is the E mount that does the same thing. This is the E mount plus K mount that does the same thing. So there you can see the size difference. That's back focus for different lenses. PL is longer, K is shorter, which is Pentax, and E mount is shorter again. And the closer you get your lens and wide back focus becomes super important, especially with digital shooting. The closer the last element of the lens gets to the sensor, the more parallel the light is coming out of the lens and hitting the sensor. So you get less purple fringing because you get less divergence between the red, the green, and the blue light between the lens and the sensor.
Okay, moving on. John McKinnon.
One thing that we didn't say, and this is a little bit back to the other subject, but people keep asking about whether using still lenses for video or whatever. One thing to keep in mind too that we've noticed is most SLR lenses, you're going to see breathing in it if you are doing any type of focus pull at all, which means the image is going to be moving in and out, or it's going to be rotating on you. And traditionally, if you're going to be doing a focus pull, you really don't want that breathing taking place. That's the other reason why, when you start getting into higher end lenses, why you're paying what you're paying is because they've geared those elements in there to keep in there so it's not breathing on you.
Mickey?
Yeah, exactly. Professional cinema lenses, definitely, they will keep, majority of them will keep focus as throughout the entire zoom range. And that's why they cost how much they cost, as John mentioned, and also that's why they cost a lot to maintain as well.
Absolutely. Stuart, finish this up.
Just on breathing, yes, up to a certain point, it's an undesirable thing, but once you get to top-end cinema, it'll be the cinematographer's choice, and a lot of top-end lenses do breathe quite a bit, especially anamorphic lenses. There's almost no anamorphic that will not do any breathing in and out, but it becomes artistic choice at that budget level.
So
real quick, Stuart, real quick, we just did our first anamorphic shoot, and I was shocked. I was like, "Oh wow, that's weird." I'm sorry, Bill. If you haven't done it, what is that?
Listen, everybody is here to learn. And that's, I think, why we have so many people tune into office hours, because we talk about a lot of things in depth. And one of the lessons I think everybody learns when they start watching here, particularly if you're early in your career, is how much detail there is behind what seems like simple things. You think maybe the lens is just about its field of view or its zoom range. Now you're learning that there's a ton of other things that go into picking a lens. And that's why people like, one of my favorite funny things in the world is that kids were buying cameras and suddenly labeling themselves as a DP. I'm the DP on our little shoot. And directors of photography, serious directors of photography, spend huge careers studying this stuff in great detail to learn all the nuances of the things we're talking about today. And it's a very respectable and highly skilled craft. John, you want to make a last comment before we move on?
Yeah, and just to jump on the bandwagon with that, Bill, and is to sit there and say that you're a DP because even if like Sony Venice or the top ARRI that's out there, even if you know the camera, that's most DPs. If you actually look at them, is they understand lighting. How is light portraying my image? What is it doing to it? That's what a DP is. The cameras, the tools, everything else is going to change. We've got ACs, we've got technicians that can handle that side of it. A true DP is somebody that actually understands lighting.
And they often have camera operators to actually operate the camera.
Yes,
that's
sir.
not their job.
Exactly. Absolutely.
I should point out that some of us hate the term DOP. We are cinematographers. And
Yes,
that
sir.
is a whole other argument. That would be a second hour by itself. But
Bring
just
it up
one
with
thing
the
on
British.
Yeah, I can see who's laughing. But just one thing on light and what have you. And if you go through and look at past Oscar winners and Cannes winners, you will find most cinematographers who have started in their teens and some earlier really don't get good until they're in their late 50s through mid 60s. It takes that long to understand how light works in a lens and how to convey emotion with it.
Mickey, real quick.
Yeah, just to add on to what John was saying, like, yeah, the DP cinematographers, same banana. What they really should be focusing on is storytelling. As John mentioned, like, we have technicians to handle the cameras and even the lights, but the decision on, say, like, this scene deserves a soft light, this character only should be shot in a profile because so and so, artistic choice, whatever, that's what the DPs focus on, not so much like, we're gonna use an ND3 on this one.
Yeah, Sky, we still have 7, so I'm going to let you go real quick, but get in and get out.
We talk about the philosophy of this, and to John's point, what's the right tool for the right job? And again, those tools are going to change. So the core is, how do you move the story forward, and with what's your resources?
Yeah, and add art to the technology. I mean, the technology is important, but the art is even more important.
Both,
That's on
both
top of it.
and at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to the next one. This is Tim Turner in Eagle, Wisconsin, saying, I'm setting up a POV camera for a church from the back pointing front. How do I determine the field of view I need for the lens? I know the distance from the camera to the point of the widest point for the field of view I need. So John has his hand up to give us some tech.
I'm not trying to be, what are you trying to accomplish?
Okay. So
does that make sense? I mean, it's...
Yeah, the problem is Tim isn't in the chat here, so it's hard to determine his intent. Isn't there a calculator online that shows you different lens combinations for the size of the sensor that you're using and tells you what the field of view will be at X zoom distance?
Yeah, there's a lot of different softwares out there. Red actually makes a really good one that does a lot of stuff for depth of field and everything else. But I mean, there's all types of field of view calculators that are out there. But it's really going to depend on, and I'm not trying to be coy. What are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, there you go. Sky real quick and Mickey real quick. Go ahead.
Shallow depth of field is a style, and it may be a luxury that you may not be able to have if you're trying to chase somebody around and they're moving in and out. You need a skilled camera operator and the equipment to follow it. That may not be what you're able to do.
Well, and depth of field, it's a look and a thing, but if you're distance back in a service, does the minister or whoever's leading the service move front to back? Because if you got a shallow depth of field and you've got somebody who's changing the distance to the lens, you're going to be chasing focus all day long. So you may want a smaller aperture and a bigger depth of field to help you out there. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, traditionally, one would bring what they call a director's viewfinder, which is essentially is a zoom lens that someone can look through and figure out a frame, look at it, and see what focal length would work best. There are a lot of director's viewfinder, how do you call it, emulators, available on mobile devices, so that would help you out. You have to, of course, take into account the sensor size that you're shooting with as well.
Absolutely. Let's keep moving on because we've got 7 more questions in 15 minutes. This comes from A. Mitchells in Washington. Which mid-range lenses are best and worst for bokeh? Please also define best and worst for this kind of effect. Thanks. And he has a note here. Mid-range in this case refers to both budget as well as the broader general utility of shooting needs and environment. Does anybody want to tackle the whole bokeh? And for those of you who don't know the basics, when a lens gets out of focus and you have points of light in the back, this is how most people relate to bokeh in the beginning. The shape, size, softness, quality, aesthetic of that out of focus stuff behind an image is what most people talk about when they refer to the bokeh. I've heard it both ways. Stuart, go ahead and talk more on it.
It's actually a Japanese word, and it's about how the image makes you feel. So yeah, it's weird. It really is an artistic and a creative choices for how much to put in. Some lenses are sharper. Most modern lenses are sharper. So you tend to have like a more, like when you get decent bokeh out of a modern lens, the person who is in focus will jump out of the image more. If you have a look at samples, what's a good safe site to recommend? Celeb Mafia is paparazzi photographers, and you can spot when somebody is using a medium format camera to get the celebrity photos because the background blurs out nice and soft and they sort of jump out of the image. I will give you an example of the worst lenses to use for bokeh. Just down here. These things by Optica, which is actually a rebranded Samyang or Rokinon, by the way, are a mirror-based lens. That has the absolute worst donut bokeh you will ever see. It is hated by photographers, but it is really good.
No, wait a second. Maybe you're selling
video.
donuts. Maybe that's, if you're working for Winchells.
Instead of it being a nice blurred shape to, say, a leaf in the background, the leaf changes brightness in the middle of it.
I will say this whole topic is one of the reasons why people move up from camcorders, because camcorders tend to have incredibly small chips and everything is in focus all the time. You turn them on and you can't do any depth of field at all. And that's just another look, it kind of says.
I'm doing depth of field on that camcorder, and that's a 3-chip JVC.
Well, there are exceptions. All right, let's keep moving along. That's answered. Moving to Charles Klein's New York City. What's the next evolution for lenses? Have we reached peak lens? What comes after the Arri Master Primes and the Zeiss Autos? Because we're getting bigger and bigger sensors that have more and more resolution. So resolving, I would imagine, you're going to get better and better lenses to try to keep up with that. Let's do Mickey first and then Stuart second. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was going to say, because I believe the Master Primes are rated for up to 8K, if I remember correctly, or maybe Guy can correct me. But yeah, as we go up in resolution, that's when we'll need lenses that can more accurately, translate that into the sensor.
That's scary. Somebody's going to look back someday and going, 8K, come on, we're at 64K at least. Oh, gosh, okay. Stuart, do you want to pop in real quick before we move on to the next thing?
Roughly speaking, full-frame DSLR lenses are 4K rated. Medium format glass for a 70mm size sensor is 8K rated. But just one important point of verb, noun, adverb. Lens, L-E-N-S, two lens, L-E-N-S-E. One is the art of taking and one is the device you're taking it on. And lenses is what I'm surrounded by, which is why I don't have kids.
It reminds me of the debate used to have between more than and over. My right hand is over my left hand. It's not more than, but people use them all. It's language is funny. All right, that's answered. Moving on to Eric Hall's next one from Mount Vernon. Is f2.8 throughout the zoom range a good? Oh, and then that's where it stops. So yes, it's good. It's nice. Not as good as 1 point something. Not and better if you're trying to get faster lenses than 4 point something. But it's good. Go ahead, Sky.
Again, it's the depth of field. 2.8 is a pretty standard distance. 4 is you're going to get a much broader range of movement inside the z-axis.
Yeah, and is it as important as other lens features? It depends on where you shoot. If you do outside wildlife, probably not, unless you're at dusk and later, because you have plenty of sunlight. If you're in a theater and you have a scene with very, a spotlight on somebody on the stage, you need much more, depending on how bright the spotlight is. Or you're in dim evening thing, you want to use magic hour at night, then a faster lens that gathers more light and puts it to the sensor is going to be your friend. Stuart?
Alex has touched on this with describing where he swaps from using large format lenses or full frame lenses through to B4 cameras with smaller sensors for depth of field and what have you. But just a general rule, the wider you go for your field of view, the closer the hyperfocal distance gets to the camera, and you actually get to a point where you can focus a lens at an infinity, and anything that is beyond the hyperfocal distance is in reasonable focus. So at f2.8 on a really wide lens, it doesn't matter if the person is 3 meters or 20 meters, they are effectively in focus. But as you shrink down the field of view, the depth of field shrinks, and then it becomes a lot more critical as to what your f-stop is for your depth of field for your subject matter.
Mickey?
Yeah, I think Eric is asking about if having essentially the same opening, in this case 2.8 throughout the entire zoom range is important. And for work, for video work, 100%. Like, you do not want to have to adjust your opening
Absolutely.
but in between shots, or even during a shot if you're doing a zoom move during the shot. You want it constant, no matter what opening you pick. Like, say, even if you get a T4 lens, you do not want to have to adjust that as you shift from shot to shot.
Yeah, that's particularly important if you're shooting like outside and you have one particular iris set because there's a lot of light. You follow somebody inside. For me, it used to be I wanted it on automatic so it would track it in. I learned I did not want that. I wanted it on manual so I could go as quick as possible from one setting to the other, so that I only had to make one adjustment in post at I had one exposure outside and one exposure inside. I can change that and I'm done. I don't have to track a shot that's changing over time, which was a PITA. Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add on that, it's a tangent from our current topic, but yeah, that's the advantage of having a knowledge of post. When you shoot, you're shooting to edit. You're shooting for the edit, not trying to you think you may be helping out, but it's not really. If you know how to cut and what the cut of that specific piece of content needs, then you will be able to make decisions on set that would make the rest of the process way easier for the people down the line.
From your lips to God's ears. Just saying.
Okay, just moving on. Michael J. New York City is in next with, when do you buy a used camera lens and whom do you trust? That's a very good question. Craigslist, incredibly no, it's not. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I have a lot of I've purchased a lot of used equipment, especially microphones. Like, I have a lot of money in used microphones, and I buy them from people I trust, people I know who they take care of their gear. I wouldn't trust like a random person on eBay or online. I get them from people I know.
I just always think, if somebody bought things and it didn't work quite right, it wasn't bad, but didn't work quite right, I don't think I'll keep it. What am I going to do? I'm going to sell it on one of those services. The completely honest person will tell you, but there's not everybody like that out there. Let's move along. We're going to James Babbitt from here in San Diego. Hi, James. For a full frame mirrorless camera, autofocus lenses generally work well for video and still photography. What lens spec matter most for video? We've covered a lot of these things in the general discussion before. Full frame mirrorless, they are doing brand new lenses for most mirrorless cameras. There are adapters you can get that take like EF lens mounts and other lens mounts and adapt them to the new mirrorless. But in my experience, is it the flange lens that's different? There's something different, and it seems like they're all coming out with brand new lens sets made specifically for those. Stuart, what do you know about that?
Just to James's question, for full frame mirrorless camera, autofocus lenses, there really is only one family of full frame lenses with autofocus that is any good. And I'm going to upset people by saying it. And that is the Sony designed lenses that worked for their VG900 camera, because the VG900 camera was a video camera with a full frame sensor, and the autofocus lenses that were designed for it, which can also go onto a FS7, FS5, FS7 Mark II, FS100, FS700, they're about the only ones that do decent continuous autofocus. Every other lenses are designed as DSLR lenses. They're not designed for constant autofocus in the way that those Sony lenses are. They are amazing. That's why secondhand they still retail at a massive price.
Nice. Sky?
Well, it's also the conflict between the engineers and the marketing people. And sometimes they change up things because the company needs to sell a new, they've reached market saturation. So I've always been frustrated with, do I marry into a family? And I thought you were going to say Tamron or Sigma. And, but again, the Sigma lenses, the art lenses for the price, it's been a healthy thing for me. So again, do you marry into a family of a quality of product? Now, Zeiss would be a nice family to marry into, but that would be marrying up for me.
Yeah. And the other thing is that you never know how long things are going to last. I mean, since my 5D Mark II, all the Canon glass that I bought makes it to now, but now I'm a little, okay, seems to be the industry's going micro four thirds. How long am I going to be able to stay with full frame? And will there be something coming later on, some body that's so fabulous that I want to switch everything? And that's going to be.
And that's why when Eric says, Final Cut or Premiere, it's like, it's the tool of the moment. And to your point, the lenses have a longer lifespan than the computer processor you're hang them off of.
Yeah, often the glass. I mean, glass holds its value. A good glass holds its value a lot longer than camera bodies because they're always improving those.
Good glass. Good point.
Okay, moving on to the next one. This is John Preto of Las Vegas. Stuart, can you drink coffee from any of your lenses? Do you have one of the fabulous lens design coffee? There we go. I knew somebody would have one. John Preto is drinking coffee out of a Canon L glass coffee cup.
Mm-hmm. I shoot with Pentax lenses, and most Pentax gear is weather resistant. You can actually take a K3 or a K1, roll it in dust, walk into a shower, and wash it off. And the thing keeps running. And there is footage on YouTube of a US soldier doing that twice in Afghanistan.
Define the difference that looks like that.
I could actually pour the coffee into the space above the lens and sip it.
Define the difference between water resistant and waterproof, please.
Depth. How far underwater you can go before the water pushes past the seals.
Yeah, there's a term, there's a rating standard unit for how many atmospheres of pressure.
IP rating?
Yeah, there's an IP rating. Like the camera that I've got over my shoulder is an IP67 rated camera, so it can be out in dust and weather, and it's 2 digits, so that's 67, not 67.
Yeah, we had I spent most of my career in Scottsdale, Arizona, and dust was always a constant battle. So I was always paying attention to the IP rating of everything that I bought. John, you're holding up a good one.
$9 on Amazon for these.
$9
These
for the coffee cup. See?
great gifts for nerds.
And that looks like a 24-105 coffee cup.
It is
that's the best
24 to 105.
That's the best lens ever. That really is.
Know
Good
your
coffee,
lenses.
too.
It actually was a good. It was the lens that Canon shipped as a kit lens with the 5D Mark II, and I used it for probably the first 2 or 3 years, and I loved that camera, and I love that lens. Got a lot of great shots out of it. All right, so that's been answered. Moving on to the second to the last question. This is from Stuart on the panel. Lenses, do we want to deep dive?
We don't have time, Bill. Not now.
Purple. Yeah, let's not dive into purple fringing.
Let's go to Sky's question.
Okay, we're going to finish up with Sky's question. What effect does the sensor size have on the lens? Alex, well, we can't get Alex's thing.
Yeah, he did a whole concept of when to use a 3/4 and best case. Maybe we could bring that pre-record back or ask it tomorrow.
Yeah, best use
Roll
of
the
micro
tape.
four thirds. Best use is on a camera that's designed to take micro four thirds. And what are the advantages of full frame sensors? Well, we could talk a little bit about the geometry. The larger the sensor, the easier it is just with the physics of how light works to get that shallow depth of field with aperture. Stuart, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Not that exactly, but pixel count versus sensor size. For any given number of pixels, the smaller the space they're in, the smaller the pixel pitch, the smaller the amount of light they can grab each time they're exposed. So if you look at, say, an A7S versus an A7R, which are two versions of the same body, the S is a 12 megapixel camera, whereas the R is something like 35, 36 megapixels. The size of the sensor is still the same, but you've got more pixels in them. So the R is not as good in low light as what the S was.
So the more pixels,
is
the darker the more pixels, the more light it'll suck out.
The marching orders I've heard from a lot of DPs.
The more pixels you've got, the less bright the image will be.
Well, the marching orders I've heard from a lot of DPs and cinematographers is we don't want more pixels, we just want better pixels.
Better pixels.
And, a pixel that is wonderfully sensitive, that reacts to light well, and is large enough to work in a lot of conditions can be more important than just the raw number of pixels you pack into the sensor. That gives you one thing, but it doesn't give you everything. Mickey?
Yeah, I don't know, like everything that I don't recall what everything that Alex mentioned in terms of the advantages of going micro four thirds versus, like, say, a full frame sensor, but like one of the advantages is the crop factor of micro four thirds. Say if you need a longer throw lens, micro four thirds sensor, as compared to like a full frame sensor, has a crop factor of around two times, so 2x. So like a 50 mil on a micro four thirds would be equivalent to 100 mil on a full frame chip. So if you need to do longer throws, if you need a longer focal length, but you want to save some money, it would be more affordable to go with a micro four thirds sensor camera. But of course, that comes at a cost of I don't know if you need shallow depth of field or not, because you'll get a shallower depth of field if you have a larger sensor, and also you'll get more sensitivity with the larger sensor.
I guess I was just really jealous about yesterday because we had an expert in audio, and then Jeff brought up those photos. That was a brilliant technique yesterday, and I learned a lot about microphones and audio surround. And maybe we could do this again, and somebody can bring PowerPoint to the party.
PowerPoint and
I had
lens
some
shots.
slides up for field of view before, and nobody went to it. I blame Mickey. Sky, with your micro four thirds camera, there is one other little trick. If you go through the manual, you'll find there's a 1-to-1 pixel mode in there. So if you've got a lens, say like a B4 lens or a broadcast lens, that image circle doesn't cover the entire sensor, You go into the 1:1 mode and you're effectively cropping in. It is 1 pixel per pixel in the image. It's not doing any binning or resizing, what have you. So the image quality does suffer a little bit, and it is only for 1080.
Cool. I guess I was hoping for a more broad general theory. I don't have a specific situation, but
well, it's going to be variable depending on the lenses. And I do know there are a lot of tables out there on the internet. You can find them pretty easily that shows you the crop factors and the field of view differences and things like that. So it's readily accessible knowledge out there. But if you bought a camera with one system and your buddy has lenses from another system, and you want to use his or her lenses and put them on yours, you can at least look them up online and see, my 35 is going to be this.
I was trying to find best practices I think to Mickey's point of, if you put a Micro Four Thirds in a small space, what kind of lensing is best? Anyway, it was more theory, and I didn't ask the question well. But look, it's 9 o'clock. We're out of time.
Exactly. I was just about to break in and say that takes us up to the top of the hour. Thank you all for being here today. Thank all of you in the audience. We have more than 100 people still watching here at the end of the show. So hopefully we've added some value into your lives and done something that'll make your practice easier. Thank you very, very much. And we will all see you tomorrow. Let's see, tomorrow is Thursday. Thursday is always the floating and performance day. So I don't know, does anybody remember if we have a theme for that, for those returning? I don't remember what
something amazing. It'll be fantastic.
It'll be something you don't want to miss it.
Museums.
Courtney will be doing reverb. Come on, Courtney. Reverb us out.
We're leaving. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks so much for watching today. We'll see you all tomorrow.
I can hear the music, Mickey.
I hear no music.